So off we go then. First off, thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks especially to Yannis for organizing this conference. I normally pronounce my name Arvind Iyengar, but really I won't be offended if you pronounce it differently, as long as I can recognize it as my name. Today I will be speaking on the enigma that is the akshara. This is a grapholinguistic concept that many of you would have heard of, but which still remains in many ways a bit fuzzy and elusive. But before we dive in, here is some terminology that I will be using in my talk and what I mean by these various terms. So first off is script. This is a set of symbols or graphs that we use to normally write languages, but before these individual symbols or graphs are associated with a particular language. So we can talk of the Arabic script or the Devanagari script in isolation. But when we combine or match these scripts with a particular language and give the individual symbols within the script specific sound values or linguistic values, we get a writing system. This means we can specify any writing system by specifying its constituent language and script. If you want to be concise, you could use the ISO codes for the language and script in question. So how a script by itself rather is something that provides the symbols for writing a language. How those written symbols are matched or associated with spoken units, that is something that happens at the level of the writing system, not within the script per se. Also, graphetic will mean anything related to the overt or the surface form of writing, at least in this context, in this talk, while graphematic, broadly speaking, is something associated with writing in general. You could think of these terms as the written counterparts to phonetic and phonological. So coming back to the main topic, what do we mean by the term akshara? Scholars tend to define it as a graphic syllable or orthographic syllable. The prototype of an akshara is a written unit that stands for either a vowel phoneme, a vowel segment, or for a sequence of one or more consonants followed by a vowel. And when an akshara indicates a sequence of consonants followed by a vowel, the consonant segment is typically indicated in writing by a free graphetic element, something that can stand on its own within that writing system. And the vowel segment is typically indicated by a bound graphetic element, something that cannot stand on its own in that writing system. Writing systems that have aksharas of this kind are known as alpha syllabaries. Also, among aksharas that denote a consonant followed by a vowel, there's this specific subtype where the vowel sound does not have a distinct graphetic element. The vowel sound is not overtly written. Only the consonant sound is overtly written, and the vowel sound is considered inherent to the akshara. This is typical of writing systems known as abugidas. So aksharas are characteristic of writing systems that are alpha syllabaries and or abugidas, because of which such writing systems are sometimes called aksharic systems, which is the adjective of the noun akshara. Great. So what's the problem here? Why am I even talking? We've identified what a prototypical akshara looks like. We've identified what the minimal akshara looks like. But what about the maximal akshara, so to speak? How much can we stretch the stereotype, I should say, the prototype, before that prototype breaks? And if it breaks, how can we fill in any conceptual gaps to make our definition of the akshara epistemologically and theoretically robust? So let's go ahead and test our prototype. As we said, the prototypical akshara is defined as a written unit that indicates either a vowel sound or one or more consonants followed by a vowel sound. Do we have prospective aksharas that stand for a consonant sound only? The answer is yes. We see this in Malayalam, in Bengali, and in Manipuri, written in Meitei Mayak. We also said that in a prototypical akshara made up of so-called free as well as bound graphetic elements, the free element typically stands for a consonant sound, while the bound element indicates a vowel sound. Are there prospective aksharas where the bound element denotes a consonant sound? Again, yes. Then there are prospective aksharas that have graphetic elements which do not stand for a consonant or vowel segment per se. So Hindi in Devanagari has this symbol called the Ardha Chandra or the Chandra Bindu, which indicates vowel nasalization. And phonologically, nasalization is a supra-segmental. Similarly, written Burmese uses bound elements to indicate tone, and tone is also supra-segmental. Punjabi in Gurmukhi uses a bound element to indicate consonant gemination. Then there's this bound element which you find in several seemingly aksharic systems. Its generic name is virama, but it's often described as a vowel killer because you attach this element to a free graph to show that the free graph indicates a consonant sound only, with no vowel sound after it, or no inherent vowel sound. Graphetically, this vowel killer element forms part of the overall akshara. But phonologically, what exactly does it indicate? How should we ideally describe the phonological value of this bound element called the virama? Then, if we were to take a more macro perspective, a bird's eye view of the situation, there's the question of how the same written sequence, the same sequence of prospective aksharas can have different spoken values depending on the language in question. So here you have two written sequences, both of which appear to be made up of more than one akshara, and which are used identically across writing systems. So the sequence on the left in Devanagari script is a valid lexical item in written Sanskrit, Nepali, Hindi, and Marathi, and probably many more. The one on the right in Tibetan script is valid in written Tibetan, Dzongkha, Ladakhi, and Balti, at least. So each of these apparent akshara sequences, they are homographic across writing systems, but they are not homophones. Depending on which language's phonology you're applying to these written sequences, they would be pronounced quite differently. Differently in terms of their phonemes or segments, but also in terms of their syllable structure. The akshara sequence on the left, for example, is pronounced as disyllabic in Sanskrit and Nepali, but as monosyllabic and with a consonant coda in Hindi and Marathi. The converse is also true. You also have examples of homophones that are not homographs. In some cases, such homographic sequences may be in free variation. The difference in surface appearance may be purely graphetic, and the user can freely choose between one form or the other. This is the case in the Hindi in Devanagari and the Tamil and Tamil examples you see on your screen. Whereas in other cases, which spelling you use will depend on which orthography you're following, as in the Malayalam example. But regardless of spelling and regardless of the number of aksharas, their phonological value or pronunciation remains the same. So when the written form and the spoken form can each vary independently of each other, it gets a bit tricky to define one in terms of the other. We were able to define the prototypical akshara using a phonological metric or a phonological yardstick, but this becomes more and more difficult to do, especially in a rigorous and a robust manner as we move away from the prototype. Now, a lot of this has already been addressed by scholars, especially from the psycholinguistic and the pedagogical perspectives. So Sonali Nag, for instance, mentions that depending on the writing system, it's not just vowel phonemes that can have secondary or bound forms. Consonant phonemes can also have such secondary or bound or satellite or diacritic forms. Conversely, Prakash Padakannaya and colleagues point out that the written akshara can have various phonological values, be it a single phoneme, an entire syllable, or even a part of a syllable. On this point, Amalya Jnanadesikan has written that as the akshara becomes graphetically more complex, more intricate, its phonological value becomes harder to predict, which kind of captures my point neatly, that it's difficult to use phonology to define an akshara as we move further away from the simple prototype. So essentially what I'm arguing for here is to move away from a phonology-dependent definition of the akshara to a phonology-independent one. Of course, the akshara will still be associated with phonology, but it won't be decided by it. This is a subtle distinction, but it's a crucial one. So I argue that across writing systems, we are better off conceiving of an akshara primarily as a written unit, which graphetically is made up of a mandatory free graph, that is an obligatory free graph, and optional bound graphs. In theory, the number of bound graphs could be infinite. In practice, how many bound graphs you could add will depend on factors like how many bound graphs that writing system even has in its inventory, which of those bound graphs can occur together, and so on. Also, when I say free graph, I also include so-called ligatures and conjuncts and stacked graphs compressed into one segmental space. I include them under free graphs because of their properties. They can have a distinct sound value. They themselves can take on bound graphs and so on. So they behave much like regular free graphs, so to speak. Now, phonologically, the free as well as the bound elements within an akshara could have any sound value, consonant, vowel, nasalization, tone, whatever. That does not matter because now we are defining an akshara simply as a written unit centered around a free graph, regardless of its sound value. To that free graph, you can add or remove as many bound elements as possible, as long as it's graphotactically valid. That does not affect the akshara count. But if you add or remove a free graph, then you're increasing or decreasing the number of aksharas. The next thing, of course, is to test this definition on as many writing systems as we can and see how well this definition works and how we can further refine it. And along the way, ask questions like, does a so-called aksharic system necessarily have to be an abugida as well as an alpha syllabary? Can a writing system that is one but not the other also be considered aksharic, as in the case of Divehi in Tana, Sindhi in Arabic, and various South Asian languages written in Braille in a system that's known as Bharati Braille? In fact, this question is relevant not just from a graphematic point of view, but also sociolinguistically. And thanks to Amalia Jnanadeskan for bringing this to my attention, because in several South and Southeast Asian languages, including Divehi, Sindhi, and Marathi, the word for letter or alphabet is etymologically derived from the Sanskrit word akshara. So there's lots to do here, which is good news, I suppose. For now, though, thank you in every potentially aksharic system. And I look forward to your questions, comments, or criticisms.
Thank you. Any questions?
Hi, Arvind. Amalia here. Very interesting, great talk. And we could talk about it for a long time. But one thing I wanted to come back to in your talk was how your the conjunct aksharas, say, oh, well, they're just free. But they do have internal structure. And I was positing the other day that we could consider those compounds. Do you have you thought further about their internal structure, or or what do you think about that?
Could you refer to a particular example from a particular writing system, only so that we're on the same page and we're talking about the same thing? I ask only because there's such a wide variety of conjuncts or compounds that are possible. So right. I'm wondering if you can.
Yeah, what you have on the screen right now, the ksha.
Okay.
Actually, for example, is a great example, because that you can see that there's a ka and a sh in there, so it does have internal structure.
Yes, I'm not saying that there is no internal structure. My argument is one of, how should I put it? Both those forms that you see on your screen being valid, and therefore, but at the same time, being phonologically identical, being homophonous. So my argument basically was not that conjuncts or ligatures are devoid of internal structure, or there's no method to the madness. That was not my intention at all to insinuate. Rather, what I was saying was the fact that we have these kinds of graphetic and also graphematic processes taking place somewhat independently of phonology means that we should look for a definition of the akshara that emerges from graphematics itself and is not dependent on phonologies. In other words, an autonomous definition of the akshara is better than a let me rephrase it, that autonomistic, I think was the term used. That is, a phonology independent definition of the akshara is preferable to a dependentialist or a phonology dependent one. That was my only thesis over here. Have I addressed what you were asking, or have I gone off on a tangent?
Yes, and I really like that you're looking at the script in its own right like that. One just small point I would make, when you were showing all the different pronunciations of the ansha,
Mhm.
I think by transcribing the vowels differently, you're those are to some extent just different traditions in transcription, and I think it overstates the difference. They're like the upside down A. The literature, if you actually look at the phonetic literature in Hindi, it will say that is a more correct transliteration of the vowel, and the upside down V is often used instead, but it's pretty much the same vowel. I think that by varying the vowels, I think you're overstating the difference. It's just a very minor point, but
no, that's a criticism I will cop on the chin. That's a very fair point that you made. I may have been a bit cheeky over here, but yeah, it wasn't. It was at the same time a bit unintentional. I wanted to emphasize that the same aksharic or written sequence can have different phonological values, but in the process I ended up demonstrating that they have different phonetic values, which is a bit self-evident. I guess I should have emphasized the one on the right, the example in Tibetan script more, because there the difference is a bit starker, a bit more evident in that in Tibetan and Dzongkha you have it's mono. They're all monosyllabic, but the syllable is far simpler and open and has tone compared to the Ladakhi and Balti ones. But yes, I take your point that I may have overstated my point over here, at least in the Devanagari examples.
Thanks.
Any other question? Let me see if there's any online question.
Richard Sprout and Terry Joyce have their hands up.
Richard.
Yeah. So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So K.P. Mohanan, in his 1982 PhD thesis on lexical phonology, that's going back many years, obviously, before many people in the audience were born. But in any case, it was on lexical phonology, but it was an analysis of Malayalam. And he claimed that in Malayalam syllables, basically, all of the consonants between the vowels, so all of the pre-consonantal vowels were part of the same syllable, even things that you would think in other languages were actually split across two syllables. And if you look at what he actually did, he actually basically assumed that the akshara corresponded exactly to a phonological syllable. Now, one could argue that's kind of silly, but it does bring up the issue that, when you talk about the relation between the written form and the phonological form, it does kind of depend upon what you assume the phonological form should be at some level. I mean, forget the surface phonetics, what do you assume the phonological form is at some deep level, right? Because I think that rather gets to the point of what is the relationship between the graphical form and the phonological form.
I agree with you. Yes, absolutely. Because I mean, sure, we're talking, or rather, I was talking about how best to define the akshara, and then how best to define it as a graphematic unit, as a written unit. But you're right in that it's also important to, along the way, define what you mean by phonology and the various elements thereof. So I don't dispute what you're saying in principle at all. Regarding the details of what Mohanan argues in his PhD, I'll have to look it up. I do find it quite intriguing, especially because the Malayalam examples on your screen, I suppose I should have attributed them to Mohanan. These are taken from his chapter in The World's Writing Systems, edited by Daniels and Bright. And his point, Mohanan's point, was to illustrate that the same phonological sequence, Nanma, was, let me try and change this slide over here, was written using the di-aksharic sequence at the bottom before the 1970s, and then there was an orthographic reform, and then was written using the tri-aksharic sequence just above. So yes, while that does not address the question of the finer aspects of phonology that you raised, Richard, I think that aspect can be addressed without my argument or thesis over here being impacted. I wonder if I've addressed your comment satisfactorily, or have I missed something?
No, I don't think so. I think it's fine. It's just that I think you need to obviously consider both the phonology and the graphical form. And I think your point about the akshara having its own internal properties is entirely valid.
Great, thanks.
We still have time for a short question by Terry.
So highly naively, I'm just wondering about what they correspond to if it's only at the akshara level. Are we moving towards a morphemic level in any of these examples?
A good question, a very good question. Possible. I mean, in fact, and it's not just the morphemic level, but there's a potential logography as well, because the syllable, I really should not call it the syllable. There is this graph in the Devanagari script inventory, which is often called a ligature, for want of a better term. But it's a graph, a basic shape, grundform, whatever name you want to give it in itself. It's a distinct, graphatically distinct element that is used to denote the phonological syllable om. Om per se is a phonological syllable in itself, but it's also a word in itself. So it's, by default a morpheme, you could say. So here you have a single free graph, I suppose, or a ligature, whatever name you give it, that corresponds to, that has linguistic value. What that linguistic value is a different question, whether, it's a syllable or a morpheme or an entire lexical item. That's, the phonological side of things, or the linguistic side of things. On the purely graphematic side of things, is om and akshara. I don't know as yet. And I suppose I would benefit from, inputs from other people. So short answer, that was a long answer to your question. The short answer is, could an akshara represent a morpheme? In principle, yes. But, it would be nice to have more concrete examples from a wide range of writing systems on, what is and is not possible before making a more final pronouncement.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Arvind, and sorry for having
your
name.
Not at all, not at all. Like I said, I recognized it as my name, so I was quite happy. Thanks again.